When you can simultaneously love your first draft, because it's sacred and it's special, and critique your first draft, this is where something amazing happens. And revision becomes less about fixing your mistakes and making it perfect, and more about the artistry of it, more about the sculpting and the creation and the forming and the molding. Hello, sunshine, and welcome back to the NeuroDivergent Creative Podcast. Today's topic is, what the hell is a developmental editor? So, if you are writing a book, you will eventually need an editor. If you are self-publishing, a lot of times that could be a self-edit, or you could hire a freelance editor. There's a lot of range in what types of editing are available. And we are most familiar with copy editing. So copy editing is literally going in and saying you don't need that comma. This should be a semicolon. This is how your paragraphs should be structured, looking for typos, grammatical errors, punctuation, format. Those are copy editing. A developmental edit is bigger. It's broader. It is taking the story as a whole, reading it, and it's kind of like giving a book review. It's saying, this part of the world building needs a little bit more, or could you explain how the magic system works? So we are checking for things like plot continuity and pacing. Are you getting to the certain beats of the story at the appropriate time? Does anything feel rushed? Is anything taking too long to get through? Shout out to Tolkien. Sorry, but Lord of the Rings is hard to read. The pacing is rough sometimes. Sometimes it's all action, and sometimes you're just all right, we're gonna describe a tree for 16 pages. It's fine. This is fine. I can't do it. I have ADHD. I have a disease. So we're looking at plot, pacing, we're looking at character development and character motivation, making sure that what a character is saying and thinking and doing makes sense for them. If you have a character who's morally good, they wouldn't do something totally heinous and evil. That's kind of basic. Something that came up for me in my first draft was that, and I'm going to talk about first drafts in a minute, but I didn't really have a lot of character development on the page. And I also was just sort of writing stuff and expecting you to take my word for it. So I would say something like, Alex had always trusted Stella. But what I did in the revision, because I had a coach helping me and flagging these things and saying we need to see the trust. We need examples of the trust. We need the context. You can't just be I trust you. I mean, you can, but in a novel, we've got time to develop those pieces of your character, your world, your plot, etc. So in the second revision, there was a lot more of building in the history between characters, putting a lot more of the inner monologue on the page. And that is normal. It is normal for your first draft to be incomplete, to be imperfect, to need revision. And that is normal because first drafts are not the final draft. And here's something that I could talk about all day. I love a first draft. Love a first draft. The first draft is a sacred pact between you and the spirit of your creative soul. It is this beautiful agreement that you are going to bring an idea into the world. I'm going to make myself cry. I just literally love stories so much, and I really love a first draft because it's such an act of trust. It is such an act of saying, I have this idea, I have this vision for a story that I want to tell, and I'm going to tell it the best that I can. And the very first way that comes out of you is going to be kind of halting. It's like a baby's first steps. You're going to falter a little bit and you're going to fall on your ass and you're going to be like, this doesn't make any sense. And there's going to be plot holes and things that you forgot about. And that's perfect. I know that's like a bad word. Like we don't do perfect here, but that's exactly what it is supposed to be. And so when I am working with somebody on developing or like revising that draft into the more polished final manuscript, I am holding the space, the compassion, the empathy for the first draft, because first drafts are awesome, and I'm not going to let you be mean to your first draft. So here's what tends to happen when a perfectionist, a former gifted kid, an eldest daughter, like all the types of people that I work with the best, because that's me too. Like I'm also a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser. When we are working on the first draft, there's this tendency to cringe, especially when we go back and reread it. So you go and you look at something that you wrote, and even if at the time you were writing the first draft, you're like, this is amazing. I'm writing the best book ever. I'm so excited about this. You can go back for that revision and think, what was I thinking? What does that even mean? Why did I leave this cryptic note for myself? But I'm not going to let you be mean to that first draft or the version of you that wrote it, because otherwise we would not be here and there would not be a revision and there would not be the future final manuscript. Like when I say the first draft is sacred, I really mean it. There is something so special about being willing to just drop it like a baby giraffe and be all wobbly and figure it out as you go. I just love it. I just love it. Okay. So when it's time to revise, we tend to, I say we, yeah, no, I'm there. I'm doing it. I'm on like my 5th draft of this book because I keep like changing things. I'm like, no, it should be like this. They shouldn't be sisters. Stella should be the aunt. And then I'm like, there's a dad involved. And I'm like, no dad. That's weird. I can't make that work. And I can't totally figure it out, but the vibes remain the same. And that's good. I think that's good. So we tend to procrastinate when it comes to revision because it's like, but couldn't I have just like knocked it out of the park on the first try? Why wasn't it perfect? Why didn't I do better than that? No. We do not have time for this. I mean, we do. We can take some time for that. In fact, let's do. It is okay to sit in the suck of not being perfect and not nailing your perfect manuscript on the first try. Like, it's okay to kind of not get it, because if you were a former gifted kid like me, that means that you were probably getting really good grades on papers and tests because you knew what teachers wanted and there was a rubric to follow and you were pretty good at following that rubric. There is no rubric for first draft of a whole book aside from write the book, but it's not like, oh, you need an opening argument and you need to have 5 sentences per paragraph and you need to cite your sources and yada, 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 yada. When you were writing a book, it's so personal, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Like there's a lot of you that goes into the creative process of writing a book. And then facing that is kind of scary, especially when you've realized, okay, the first draft isn't going to be perfect. But then we also have to work to make sure that you know that the revision isn't going to be perfect either, and that it might take some time to get it where you want it to go. So now that we know that, and we have acknowledged that, stop procrastinating and let's develop that manuscript. When you can simultaneously love your first draft, because it's sacred and it's special, and critique your first draft, this is where something amazing happens, and revision becomes less about fixing your mistakes and making it perfect, and more about the artistry of it, more about the sculpting and the creation and the forming and the molding. Because I view a manuscript and a first draft as like an act of creative love for your story, it's really special. Like I really treat it like it's special. I'm not going to just churn out some word count and be like, oh, well, I charge X for developmental editing by the word because blah, 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 blah. That's not really my vibe. So when I work with people on a developmental edit, we're going to work together for either 6 months or 12 months, You pick, like, do you want more breathing room or do you want to get it handled in a shorter time frame? And then I'm reading the draft. I'm probably going to read through like a first draft 2 or 3 times because 1, I want to immerse myself in the story. 2, I want to start looking for things in the character development, in the world building, in like the conflict and the stakes of the plot. And those things need a few go-throughs with like a critical eye for the development of the book. So when I'm working with somebody on a developmental edit, our agreement is that like the story is here and we may need to go in and refine, we might need to subtract, we might need to add, but like we trust this process. And I take great care to not put like rejection into my work with my writing clients. And like it just happened in critique. My most recent critique call that I ran with my Monday group, somebody had been working on a story and the main narrator was like a 45, 50-year-old guy who's a neurosurgeon and like had a wife and a child. And she was having a lot of trouble writing him. 1, because she didn't like him because as the character, as he was designed, he was kind of a bad dude. Like he was doing dubious activities that were not fun to write about. But she kept thinking like, but this is like the story on my mind. This is the vision that I have. And then she also took my speculative fiction course, my summer camp that I just ran. And she started working on a short story in there. And the difference between the two, like, her description is coming more easily and like I'm following it. There's not like a struggle for pacing and to like fill things up. It felt like with the 45-year-old narrator dude, she was like rushing through to the end of a scene just to be rid of him. But in this short story, she was able to like stay and spend a lot more time with the character and in the character's mind with them. And that showed up on the page. And that's the sort of shit that I'm going to say as a developmental editor. I'm going to be like, there's so much passion, more energy, more footwork. It's like you got to know that I'm the person for you before you hire me to do that. And that makes sense. Other developmental editors are going to have a totally different approach. I don't think everybody is as like, let's do spiritual work with the authentic spirit of your story. Like that's not every developmental editor, but it is me. And you should know that. So your mileage may vary, but for me and my developmental editing process, that's more of my approach is that like, I'm going to read through the story 2 or 3 times. I'm going to give you the feedback and then we're going to coach on that revision process for those 6 to 12 months. So while you are working on the revision, you can send me the revisions if you're doing it, like I'm talking to you like you're here hiring me, which you can. I'll put a link in the show notes on how to book a consult for that. Or you can go to my beautiful new website, askfishfisher.com, for more details on that. When should you hire a developmental editor? This is a great question. Whenever you want to. I would recommend if you are writing like totally solo, you probably want to have your first draft complete before reaching out to a developmental editor. I have sort of like an intermediary step, which is my working title writing incubator. And that is a $3,000 program that has lifetime access. And we have coaching calls and co-working times and critique workshops. That's an important component. The critique workshops are actually like really hot. That's where it's at if you want support in writing that first draft. So if you are having trouble finishing the first draft, which could be like a neurodivergent accommodation thing, focus, executive function, demand avoidance, all that good stuff, or it could just be like you don't have time, prioritizing like your energy with your busy life is difficult. That is true and fair. Primarily I work with neurodivergent, chronically ill, and or queer first-time authors. That's not hard and fast rules, but that is the majority of my clientele. And in this incubator space, that's designed to get you through the process of the first draft. And then You can obviously just stick around in there during the revision process. Like you can get more critiques, it's whatever. But if you want that really in-depth, like you want me to get my hands in it, you want me to like pop the hood and look at what's going on in this book and give you like a full rundown, that's going to be the developmental editing package. So also, like, you don't have to hire me. If you're like, that is not my vibe, good. Like, you should know that. You can absolutely just Google developmental editors or go on social media. You can ask on Twitter or Threads, or just look up the term developmental editor or like dev edit, and that can help you find a developmental editor. So in general, developmental editor is going to come in after the first draft is completed, and you're going to work with them while you are in revision. Once you have the developmental edit completed, and also important note, sometimes this edit happens like with a publisher. So on my first book, The Gaslighting of the Millennial Generation, I got a publishing deal off my book proposal. So the book was not finished. I didn't have a finished manuscript. So for fiction books, you do need a finished and polished manuscript before you start querying for agents and publishers. But if you are doing nonfiction, you can query with a proposal, which means that you might not have that book finished when you get the deal. And a lot of times, sometimes not, like if it's a smaller indie press, they might not have a large staff of editors, but typically there will be an editor on staff who will do like a developmental read through and give you some developmental feedback. And then there's going to be a final copy edit. And that final copy edit is just, the final polish. We're doing formatting and headers and margins and typos and periods and commas. And then it's ready for publication. So kind of a process, a good process, a fun process for me. I love a story, and I love being able to read like a raw story and helping to shape it. That's so much fun for me. And I've come to realize that about myself. I was like, oh shit, I think I'm a developmental editor. I think that's what I do already. I just wasn't calling it that. So I'm calling it that now. Caitlin Fisher, developmental editor and revision coach, as well as 14 other things because I have ADHD. I'm pretty sure that's a wrap on this topic. If you have other questions about book writing, whether that's first draft, revision, whatever, please put them in the comments on the YouTube. Or if you are listening, you can DM me on Instagram or whatever. Just tell me your favorite part. I love that. I love hearing from you. And yeah, ask away. Like, I love talking about books. I love talking about stuff. So please, you can always DM me. My DMs are open. Okay, awesome. I'm going to call it here so that I don't keep just talking about how much I love books. But I love you. You are great. I hope that you have a fantastic week ahead of you and a beautiful, I hope the next Tuesday that after you hear this, you get to pet a dog. That's my wish. That's my wish for you. Okay. All right. I'll see you later, sunshine. Bye.